We actually went to different high schools and met working at McDonald's hamburgers. So that was neat. As just teenagers, I started working at McDonald's in 1974 when I was 16 years old. Linda and I, became close and established a very close relationship. We committed to each other, and shortly thereafter, I think our sexual activity, started down that slippery slope, and she became pregnant. That was then in January of 1976, so 39 years ago. We experienced the trauma of an abortion together.
My part in this was being raised in a family that we had a spiritual foundation, but we didn't practice our faith as much. I was raised in a large family, and Chuck was as well. I feel like our parents were kind of absorbed in their own parenting and not really paying attention to what was going on in the lives of their teenage son and daughter.
Could you share, after the abortion decision, we talked last night, we talked about a pact of silence. Could you talk about how each of you experienced that in the immediate aftermath and the days and months after that abortion procedure?
Sure. For me, it was very, very difficult. I walked out of that abortion feeling a lot of the emotions that we've seen represented today with the other speakers. The immediate relief of having the problem solved, like Planned Parenthood had told me, but really falling into a pattern of the shame, the guilt, the regret set in pretty quickly. And I was ironically studying early childhood development in college at the time. So imagine, if you will, how difficult that was for me to go on, and I had to complete my college years and earn that degree in early childhood development, and then of course I was employed in that field. I became an assistant director of a preschool, and daily watching the joyful parents coming in and entrusting us and me as well with the life of those sons and daughters. So a lot of that I had to just swallow. I became absorbed in this surreal world of, here I am joyful to see these children, but really inside I was suffering from my own shame and regret. Then we moved into, during that time frame, Chuck had gone away to college, and we were separated for, other than spring break and summers, for 5 years actually. And during that period of time, I suffered with deep depression, was hospitalized. Once when I was living at home with my parents while I went through college. My mother didn't know what else to do with me, and she committed me to a psychiatric hospital for a 2-week period during this time frame. And then I'm going to let Chuck share what that all was like for him.
Yeah, our the pregnancy obviously was a crisis. I had been planning to go to a prestigious university, and the pregnancy just didn't fit into that. Tragically, we were strongly influenced and directed by all 4 of our parents, to have the abortion. I went with Linda and her mom to Planned Parenthood to abort our child, and while I was there, I felt just a great sense of helplessness and aloneness, and lack of any control or influence on what was happening. I was very ashamed, very passive, and certainly emasculated by that. And again, I'm 17 years old, so I'm feeling like this kid who got in serious trouble, and just basically this was one of the consequences of getting out of that trouble. From the moment we left that abortion clinic, there was an absolute silence about the abortion. It was not spoken of by anyone, literally for many, many, many years. So Linda and I didn't emotionally connect on our feelings after that. We each had to deal with them completely independently, and we tried to make it go away, just make it have not happened at all. I did leave, and I joined the Army and went away to military training, and was a cadet at West Point. And so for me, that military, that tough kind of masculine gung-ho environment gave me the ability to cope by completely and utterly repressing the abortion experience and really forgetting about it. So in the short run, successfully denying that it happened, and in doing that, hardening my heart and really abandoning myself emotionally to the mother of my child. So that this went on for many, many years.
After this time period, you had 2 children, and you were clearly loving and devoted parents. Yet, as time progressed, your relationship really was moving towards a crisis. You had the shock wave of that abortion event. You both had your different ways of coping with that and struggling with that. But then it started really impacting your marriage at some point. And I think initially you weren't connected to it being the abortion as much as you just weren't happy. So you could talk about that period of crisis in your marriage and then making that connection to that the abortion was something you needed to deal with.
Okay, so I love that Kevin included this picture here of the helicopter parent, because that was me. I had a son and a daughter, and my Charlie was older, by 3 years, than my daughter Michelle. Basement, and I feel so bad about this as I look back, but went down into the basement and grabbed a piece of luggage, brought it upstairs, and I threw it on the floor and said, "I'm done, I'm leaving." And that was one of our breaking points where we realized we needed to get help. That went on, though, that type of feelings of resentment and the guilt was all building up, and we were still pretty silent about it until many years later when, and I'm going to let Chuck take this over because he's got a really crisp timeline, and I think I don't do as well as he does, so there we go.
Yeah, this, as Linda was mentioned this morning, and all the studies, I have really connected to those in a deep way. Obviously, any individual doesn't identify with all of the components, but for me, the deep repression, the denial, and the manifestation of that loss of my responsibility, as the father and the partner, manifested itself in the hardness that my military career had just fostered and allowed to grow, and a coldness, and so a disconnection to Linda's emotions, and that significant flaw in the way we communicated grew over the years to resentments, bitterness, lack of communication, and the things that weren't going well, and that ultimate crisis, I think of it now as a literal fork in the road where, thanks be to God, we were tilted in a direction towards getting some counseling and some help to begin to repair our marriage immediately. And along with that, things kind of interweave over, again, we're talking almost 4 decades now, of some, spiritual renewal, some counseling, some awareness. At one point in time, I heard a homily in Mass. Linda wasn't there with me that time, and it was the first time that I had ever heard. It was on Project Rachel, and the first time I'd heard a priest talk about healing after an abortion, and it just stunned me. It blew me away, and I actually took many weeks. I had very cautiously kind of snuck a little brochure that was available, and it took me many weeks to bring that to Linda's attention, because again, we had not been able to talk about this. We knew it was there. It would come up offhandedly every now and then. And meanwhile, I recognized that there was these waves of depression, this cloud of low self-esteem and low sense of self-worth that Linda had, even though that she was a spectacular wife and a spectacular parent. She had this cloak, and we would go through these pretty significant periods of depression and sadness. Even in the good times, it was just a sadness or a lack of joy. And I eventually recognized, and I think it was part of the early stages of healing, of beginning to take responsibility as a man and as a husband, that I need to help bring my wife to healing. And at that point, I really didn't even recognize my own pain and hurt, but it was more trying to help her to come to grips with what I realized had to have been in there. Many years after that, we had the opportunity, again, this is a long timeline, to experience the true healing that we had at a weekend, Rachel's Vineyard weekend.
I like your point about, because as I listen to you, the the beginning of your healing really was that reclaiming your fatherhood that was wounded by your passivity at the time of the abortion decision. You could really hear you beginning to take steps, and I think you initially introduced to Linda the idea that we need to attend to this issue, right? And then you went to a Project Rachel counselor. All right, tell me if you could tell briefly about that experience, and then I'll ask you something about your Rachel's Vineyard experience.
Long about the time that our kids were probably pre-adolescent stages, that's one of the times when Chuck kind of nudged me and said, hey, I heard about this Project Rachel counseling program, let's give it a try. We gave it a try, didn't work. We found that getting a sitter to come to the house and then going out to this Project Rachel counseling session that was only an hour, that was just too short of a time to dig all the way down to the wound and try to peel back the layers and get very emotional, and all of a sudden the hour's over and you go back home, and so we didn't complete that program.
It was probably another 10 years by the time we made it to the Rachel's Vineyard weekend. And so a lot of factors and things were going on. I think I was beginning to have a spiritual awakening and a renewal, not so much a renewal, but just a true grounding in my Catholic faith. And that journey was leading me to want to be a stronger Christian father and husband. And so as that came, certainly reconciliation, but also a greater awareness of the failures that I had had and my needs to step up and help us to find healing together. And so amazingly, as God works all the things, weaves the things in our lives, our son grew up and one day told us that he wanted to go into the Catholic seminary, which was pretty astonishing to us. You never would have thought that from our household. But he did go to the seminary, and as a freshman in the seminary, this is right after high school, completely boggled our mind. And again, this is the Holy Spirit working with us. He becomes the pro-life coordinator for his freshman class in the seminary, and we're just.
We had not told our children at this point either, so that's even more.
Yeah, so the kids know nothing about our own experience, and Charlie's now a seminarian, very moving and developing in his faith, and he's the pro-life coordinator. His group of seminarians go to the March for Life in Washington, and again, there's a part of me that's wanting to draw Linda towards this healing and not knowing how to do it or having the tools to do it. So we find ourselves sitting on the couch watching the EWTN coverage of the March for Life with this silly idea that maybe we'll see our son amongst hundreds of thousands of people in Washington. And the theme of that coverage was healing, was hope and healing and God's mercy. And Kevin and Teresa Burke, who's they co-founded with some others the Project or the Rachel's Vineyard weekend, was very prominently promoted. We found ourselves weeping, the tears streaming down our eyes, and in a very strong way, we're called, to respond to that. So again, another, bit of God's mercy on us. Very quickly, we signed up for the weekend retreat and went to Cincinnati for the retreat. There was about 8 other women, I think, who were post-abortive. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Chuck was one of, I think there were two or three men there. He was one of those. And what a wonderful, wonderful program. I can't say enough about Rachel's Vineyard Retreat Weekend. We went there. We were greeted by post-abortion counselors. A lot of those women, and I think that there might have been a man or two that were there, were all post-abortive, so they absolutely got it. They understood where we were at emotionally. Greeted by them. And as we went through that weekend, I love the way that Kevin describes, you make that relational connection. You feel supported. You're not the only one out there suffering. You're not the only one out there that has the regret, the guilt, the shame, all that. So you're surrounded by these women and men who have gone through this. And as you work your way through that weekend, it's very, very painful. But at the same time, you need to dig down to the root of the wound. You have to get there. And this retreat team so lovingly and compassionately take you there through various scripture exercises, through writing letters to your child, and I loved your other slide that shows the memorial service with the candles all lit and the and one of the props, I still have it from our weekend. I keep it in my jewelry box. It is, and it wasn't crocheted, it was some type of, I don't know what it is, but it's a beautiful angel that replicates your child. And I keep that. I carry it with me when I speak. Sometimes I don't have it this time. I packed too quickly, but it gives me inner strength to know that my son, Ryan Paul, is right there. But anyway, getting back to the weekend, at the end of the weekend, when you've done all these exercises, and I love the other analogy to carrying the weight on your shoulders, one of the things that you do on the weekend is you carry, at the beginning of the weekend, there's a big pile of rocks in the room, and you're wondering, what did they want to do, some landscape indoors, or I don't know. So the counselors had each one of us choose a rock or a boulder that represented how much weight, how much guilt, shame, whatever the negative emotions are that you are carrying about the loss of your child, that you aborted that child. Where's your pain level? And so Chuck picked up, and then, here's the thing. The whole weekend, you have to carry that rock around with you. And if someone sees you without it, I can't remember what the deal was there, but you carry that rock around with you when you go to meals, when you go to the restroom, all of that. And when you're ready during that weekend, then to share with the group that you're ready to turn over your rock, then you have to explain why and all that. And throughout the weekend, that is so awesome. Everyone, eventually loses their rock. And I probably about halfway through decided I'm finally forgiven myself, that God has come and given his mercy and healing to me and my forgiveness, and I gave mine up. But I noticed that my dear husband, and this is where the men portion is so ignored, and we really need to shine a light on this, but he carried his rock till almost the end. And that's what really let me know how much there's a need out there for men to be healed and to be saved and shown mercy and forgiveness. But the weekend was incredible. We ended with the Catholic priests there were giving reconciliation and a Holy Mass, and just incredible. So.
For us, I think by this time it had been 26 years, since the abortion. So that is a lot, many years of woundedness and hardness and denial. And I think that's why the weekend retreat was a good fit for us. It was, thorough, it was deep, it was difficult, and it was continuous from Friday evening all the way to Sunday, and very well designed and thought out. One of the things that was very startling to me that I did not recognize would happen was the way the women reacted to my being there. So many of them had deep resentments and bitterness and brokenness regarding certainly the man who had been the father of their child, but just men in general. And for them to journey in this healing process with another man who was grieving and needed healing from an abortion was really very healing for them. And so that was something that I didn't expect at all. The other two men there were there to support their wives. They had not been had the abortion with their wives, but they were there, and that was their presence was very helpful. Also, Linda mentioned the rock, and I was getting choked up just hearing her describe it. I think that image to me, the burden that I needed to get rid of that many years of failure, to have been there for this wonderful lady that I had, in my irresponsibility, participated in her being pregnant and not having the ability to step up and defend her or the child, and for many years of being hardened and blind to the suffering that she was going through. And so, for me, I think all these issues, has been an intense morning of just having, these folks do a very thorough and correct job of identifying all the dimensions and components and symptoms. We're all very unique and have different, stories, but I connected very deeply, to those. And that retreat, which was in 2004, so it's been 11 years since, has been, the ultimate gift of healing from the Holy Spirit that's allowed us to finally, forgive ourselves and respond to a call to tell the story and to try to help others to not make this decision, and for those millions that have to seek and find healing.